Well, when I'm doing my editing passes, I imagine my reader, just doing a little bit of reading before they go to bed at night. They're getting tired. It's like 1 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually they get to a paragraph where they go like, okay, well, this, I can put the book and go to sleep down. No. What paragraph is that?
Mm-hmm.
What paragraph were you able to put the book down and go to sleep on? I have to get rid of that paragraph, right? I want to keep you up all night.
I'm Gilbert Cruz. This is the book review for the New York Times, and today we've got Andy Weir on the show. You might know Andy as author of the science fiction novel The Martian. It's a story about an astronaut who gets stuck on Mars and has to figure out how to get home. That book, which Andy initially self-published, eventually became a bestseller and then was adapted into a blockbuster film starring Matt Damon. Several years later, Andy scored another hit with his book, Project Hail Mary, which has now also been adapted for the big screen, this time starring Ryan Gosling. Project Hail Mary starts with a middle school teacher named Ryland. He wakes up on a spaceship. He is alone. He has no idea how he got there or what he's there to do.
Ensnared.
When I talked with Andy, he said the reason that he opened the book this way is because he wanted to start with a mystery.
And so one thing I found is that if you start with like a bunch of unknowns and make the reader curious and you slowly answer those questions, the reader's like, oh, they get that satisfaction of having this thing answered, but then something else is asked and so on.
Do you find that when you're reading a book, that is when you are most pleased, when you just have to, someone else is pulling you through?
Absolutely. That's, the best thing you can hope for as a writer, honestly, is to just write something that you yourself would enjoy reading.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to put myself in my reader's shoes. Like I say, what would I enjoy if I wasn't chronically obsessed with the minutia of quantum physics? It's like, I would like that, but most readers wouldn't, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's what I like to read. I like being pulled through. I don't like, I don't like reading prolonged pieces of exposition. It's kind of like doing homework, So that's why I put so much humor in. Readers will forgive you any amount of exposition if you make them laugh while you're doing it.
Did you realize that with your first book? Did you realize that you needed to, or you wanted to put humor into your writing?
I guess the best way to put it is I realized it after the fact. Like, it's just my kind of natural mode of conversation is snarky and I'm just cracking wise all the time. And so that's the voice. I mean, Mark Watney is basically just me, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's me with all my good parts magnified and all my flaws deleted, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the idealized me. But yeah. And I noticed that was working, so I kept doing it. And then looking back on it in retrospect, I was like, oh, okay. There was a lot of exposition in there, but people didn't mind because I was making them laugh with the tone that it was given to them. Okay, lesson learned. That's good. Remember that.
So Mark Watney is, a perfected Andy Weir. Ryland
Right.
Grace strikes me as not the same. Talk to me a little bit about you vis-a-vis Ryland.
Ryland is the first time I tried to make a character out of whole cloth that wasn't just based on my own personality. Mark Watney, like I said, is just the idealized me. Jazz Bishara, who is the main character of Artemis, it was really when you think of a 26-year-old Saudi woman, you think Andy Weir. But no, she really was me as well. She had the same kind of attitude and flaws that I had when I was her age, when I was 26. Theoretically smart, yet still making bad life decisions. Most of the problems she faces are self-inflicted. And that's how I was. So I wanted to make, at that time, I said, Mark Watney was a fun character, but he wasn't a deep character. All you know about him at the end of the book is he didn't want to die. And he didn't undergo any change throughout the whole story. It's an entirely plot-driven novel. And I'm like, I want characters with more depth and complexity. Okay, so that's where Jazz came from. And I based her, I tried to give her some flaws and some problems and stuff. Problem is, I think I went a little too far and I made her kind of an unlikable protagonist. Turns out the idealized version of me is much more fun to hang out with than the real kind of version of me with all the real flaws. So then for book 3, for Project Hail Mary, I've still got to keep trying to grow as an author here. I'm going to make a character that isn't based on me. Who'd have thunk it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to start off and say like, okay, I want some core traits for this guy. I decided he's a little bit naive. He's he's like pathologically conflict averse, to the point that he's like, he fears conflict. He's a fearful person. And so I wanted to show that subtly. And then in a big reveal toward the end of the book, you learn more about that. And I also wanted him to undergo change during the course of the story to overcome some of these flaws. But this time I'm like, okay, I made Jazz pretty flawed and it drove the readers away. One of the things if a reader kind of stops rooting for your main character, you've lost them. They're going to DNF your book, or they're going to finish it and go like, okay, I finished it, but I didn't like it. So I had to make him flawed but likable. So I gave him, I tried to tone down his flaws a little bit. His situation is not his fault. It's not of his own making. I think we all feel afraid sometimes. Tried to make a character you could empathize with and like.
I'd love to talk about Artemis a little bit. You had this big hit with the Martian, and then you have a thing you didn't have with the Martian, which was expectations. You're like, it's. I described it to someone as like the second album syndrome.
Second album
you could say
syndrome.
The same thing
Absolutely.
about the second book.
I forget which rock singer said it, but he said something like, you have your whole life to make your first album, then you have a year to make your second.
Absolutely. Even hearing you talk about it, you seem to have a sense that readers were not as satisfied with Artemis as they were with The Martian or as they were with Project Hail Mary. What else did you take away from writing Artemis, and what was that experience like, putting your second album out there into the world?
Yeah. The main lessons I took away from Artemis were that I made the character a little too unlikable. I made her too immature. A lot of people commented saying like, look, I mean, she's ostensibly 26, but she talks and acts like she's 15. So like, maybe I should have just made her 15. The other thing though, I thought some of it was a little unfair. I think a lot of people basically went into it expecting a negative experience because it was a female lead written by a man.
I mean, that book definitely came out at the height of the, how would we characterize it? These questions about who can write whose story, across gender, across nationality. I want to ask you about fans, though, because I feel like you...
Oh, of course.
You are the subject of fan reaction and people leaving reviews on your second novel, people telling you, I like this, I didn't like this. You have all this feedback coming in. You can choose what to let into your life and what not. But what has it been like to be someone who now has to take the opinions of people they don't know and choose whether or not to take them seriously?
Well, it's actually very important to me, the people I don't know. I mean, I actually... in a weird way, I pay more attention to the layman than I do to, professional book reviewers, because book reviewers have their things that they're looking for. But I want to make mass appeal. I want books that just everyone likes, not just fans of like literature. And so I pay kind of in a way more attention to like Amazon negative reviews than I do to like published book reviews. And so I read them all. There are two kinds of writers, the ones who admit they read all the reviews and the ones who don't admit that they read all the reviews. But I read them all because I want to get better. But the only problem is that like Amazon reviews are not written by book critics. And so sometimes those folks have a hard time putting into words what it is that they didn't like, or they will say one thing but actually mean another. And so that's like, I have to read between the lines and analyze. I'm like, okay, I see, I look for patterns. I see like, okay, I'm seeing a lot of people are talking about, so for instance, if you read the negative reviews of Artemis, you'll see a lot of reviews saying like, Jazz was not a realistic woman because no woman would ever blah, 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 no woman would ever blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you, anything that starts with no woman would ever is false, is wrong. Like there are 4 billion women on this planet and they're all different. And so generally when I see one of those, it's almost always by a woman, and they're not really saying Jazz is an unrealistic woman. What they're saying is Jazz is a woman that I would not like. Like Jazz is a woman that if I knew her, I wouldn't want to hang out with her. And if I met her, we would not click and she would not be a friend of mine. And so what I took away from most of those reviews wasn't so much that I kind of like failed to make a realistic female character. It's that I failed to make a likable character. So that was my course correction in Project Hail Mary was, okay, you can't have the protagonist be unlikable. So
much of what Ryland has to do in Project Hail Mary and what Mark has to do in The Martian, it is about problem solving. And while, storytelling is often about conflict or tension, in looking at your past, what you used to do before being a published writer, you were a programmer, you were you can tell me about the different jobs that you have, but it almost struck me as sort of like a coder mentality, like I am going to solve this story problem, then move to the next one. And I'm wondering if there are parallels between what you used to do and what you're doing now with fiction writing.
Oh, absolutely. Like I was a computer programmer for 25 years. And so that approach to problem solving colors everything I do. Like as an engineer, I was the same. I'd be like, I want to get better as an engineer. Here's this whole type of coding or this whole set of libraries that I don't understand. I want to go learn those so that I can use them when needed. So it's the same thing. I'm trying to increase my knowledge base on what I do. And also the actual kind of work environment of being an author. It's very different than being a coder because as an engineer, I was one of a team.
Right.
And then go on to being a writer where it's like I'm all by myself. But once we get to the point where I'm working with the editor where okay, here's my manuscript, then I've been told that I'm pretty easy to work with as writers go because I don't argue too much about the notes. I'm like, I kind of see them as like bug reports.
As an editor myself, I will say that is just the most beautiful kind of writer to work with. Whatever you say, I will take these notes into consideration.
I will push back on things that if I really think I'm like, no, that one's really important to me, but I pick and choose my battles, and I 99.9% of the time. It also helps that my editor is like usually right. He'll write these notes, and I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. When we come back, Andy Weir answers your questions about his book, Project Hail Mary. We actually put out a call to New York Times readers and listeners of this show soliciting questions for you. We got so many questions. This is Matt from Norwell, Massachusetts. He says or asks, many aspiring writers are balancing their creative ambitions with full-time jobs and other responsibilities. Do you have any advice that you would give them about how to build a writing life under those constraints or under those conditions?
Well, at the time that I wrote The Martian, I had a full-time job, but I also had no social life, no friends, no girlfriend. So if you just do your best to be a complete loser, and you'll have plenty of spare time for all the writing. Well, in my defense, I had just moved to Massachusetts. I had spent my whole life in California, and I just moved to Massachusetts for an engineering job. And so I didn't have anybody nearby that I knew. And so I didn't really have anything to do. So I had a lot of spare time. I have found now that I'm a full-time professional author, and now that I have like a wife and a kid and stuff like that, it's I can't imagine. I have no idea how I would do it if I was working a day job and then attempting to write a novel in my spare time while also having a wife and kid. I just genuinely don't think I could.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. One thing, of course, you've heard this a million times that readers love about your books is not just that you write about science, but the way that you write about science. It's incredibly detailed, but it also is accessible, which is not something I think that many people can do. Madeline from Phoenix, Arizona wants to know, how do you do that? And how do you also choose what science to include in the book versus what not to include in because it would slow down maybe the story in some way?
Well, so, I go for very scientifically accurate books. I mean, there's always some MacGuffin in there somewhere. But once you get past that, I try to stay true to real science, mainly because that makes it easy for me when weird questions come up in the middle of the book. I'm like, wait, what if this and this and this happens? I'm like, well, I don't need to make up new physics to support my previously made up physics. I can just use the real physics to figure out what would happen. But in terms of expositioning complex scientific stuff, I'm not a professor, right? I don't have to make sure that the reader retains this information and is able to solve those problems on their own. I just need the reader to understand enough of the science to understand why it's a problem for the character and why their solution is a solution. The research I do, I would say maybe 5% of it ends up in the novel. The rest, it's all just like in Excel spreadsheets and documents and files on my computer. So it's like if you had never heard of relativity, I would explain it and say, like, yeah, the faster you go, the slower time goes for you. But I wouldn't try to explain all the math.
I know that you grew up in a household with a dad who was a physicist?
Yes.
And a mother who was an electrical engineer. Would you...
So I was doomed to be a nerd, yes.
Would you have been you without those influences in your life? What was that household like in terms of you just learning stuff or picking it up, piecemeal?
I think I'd still be more or less me. So it's like I didn't have a love of science drummed into me or anything like that. Dad was always there to answer questions I had, but he didn't go like, hey, come here, I'm going to tell you about physics. It was like I had questions, he had answers. Mom, well, absolutely, was a good electrical engineer. She did that for the paycheck. She has absolutely no passion at all for the sciences.
What was her passion?
Literature, books.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, she did electrical engineering for the money, like to raise me because my parents got divorced. And so she was a single mom. And I mean, my dad paid his share and everything, but that was her profession, not her passion.
Did you grow up with one of them or?
So they were married until I was 8. Then I was with my mom until I was 14. And then I was with my dad until I was 18.
You have talked about your dad being a big reader of science fiction. You have described him having a big shelf of paperbacks, science fiction paperbacks. And I'm wondering, as you close your eyes and picture that shelf, what are you seeing on that shelf? And what do you remember about those books pulling off the shelf maybe and reading at an early age?
It was awesome. I mean, because like I loved reading science fiction, and Dad had this whole collection, all the sci-fi books that he had been reading since he was like 12 or something. So it's all these like back then in the 50s and 60s, they called them juveniles. Which are science fiction with the intended audience of like, tweens and teens. And so a lot of like Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Arthur Clarke, Clifford Simak, lesser known, but still really, really good author. I really liked his stuff. And so it was just this infinite array of all these paperbacks. And I would just kind of like, okay, I finished the last one, put that back, pick one. All right, let's see what Highway to Eternity is like. All right, fine. Let's read it. Generally picking them based on the cover or based on what gathered my attention on the title.
Do you feel like you learned anything from those sci-fi masters? Obviously, they influenced you in some way, but in terms of storytelling, is there anything that you took from them?
It's weird is that they had, those boomer era like sci-fi books had a real positive view of the future. I mean, the people in the future had their problems, but the future wasn't bleak. It was exciting. It was like, real interesting stuff going on. We're going out into space. We're exploring the stars. We're encountering aliens. This is all real cool. It's so awesome. And that certainly colored my form of writing, where I tend to write positive, like, feel good stories. I think that wasn't just an aspect of those authors. My holy trinity are Heinlein, Asimov, and Clarke, but it wasn't just those authors that influence. I am an inherently optimistic person. Especially when it comes to humanity, I have a very high opinion of humanity. And so what a weird thing happened was in the intervening times, since those guys were writing novels, science fiction has become this gloomy, dour, like
Totally.
misery-scape of like, it's always the same thing. It's always like, oh, the future is horrible. Technology is bad. Every government tends toward fascism. Everything is awful. People stand in line for like Soylent Green, whatever. And I'm like, how did the view of the future get so dim? I don't know. Pessimism became trendy or something. But I just don't see it. Because when I look at the march of history, instead of trying to look forward and assuming we're going to go downhill from here, look backward and see how much uphill we've come since then. Let me put it another way. All the dystopian science fiction you see is based off of the hidden assumption that where we are living right now, this moment, is the best that humanity will ever be. And then it's all downhill from here. So it was like 20,000 years of progress upward. And here we are now at our absolute apex, and it's all just crap from then on. Do you think that this is the peak of humanity right now?
I have no way of telling.
Well, I bet you people 100 years from now would rather be there than here.
I have a question about books, but also about you growing up. So we had Guillermo del Toro on the show a few weeks ago, the director of Frankenstein and so many other wonderful movies.
Quite aware of who he is.
Okay. Just making sure. I don't like to make assumptions.
Sure, yeah.
He talked about his love of books and movies being related to what he considered a somewhat lonely childhood. And I know you have talked about isolation appearing in The Martian and Project Hail Mary. And I'm wondering where that isolation came from.
I had a pretty lonely childhood.
Yeah. Was it you in the books?
It was me in the books and then maybe one or two friends. I was one of those kids where, I always had friends, but I was never anybody's best friend. I don't know. Part of it was because we moved around a lot. So I would always be kind of plunking down into the middle of pre-existing social groups. So yeah, as a kid, I often would just have nothing to do. I'd be bored a lot, watch a lot of TV, and like, my life, my childhood and my upbringing, my life was not really that happy a story. I wasn't abused. I wasn't, assaulted in any way or nothing horrific like that. But I just had a pretty unhappy childhood. And if you made a movie out of my life, it wouldn't be a fun one to watch. So I did often feel like I was on my own without any help. So yeah, that isolation certainly is an aspect of my personality. Now, had I, maybe if I'd had more of a social life or lived in one place longer and been able to develop longer, deeper social bonds with people and be part of a large dynamic, group of folks, maybe I'd make better characters. Maybe I'd understand people better and make better, characters with depth and complexity. So
yeah, but maybe you wouldn't be a writer.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. I've got friends now, though, that I've had for like 30 years. So the friends that I made in college are still with me, You
know what? College friends are the true friends, I believe.
Yeah.
Up next, Andy talks about Project Hail Mary, the movie, and how he came up with his beloved character, Rocky. So you've been through this before. You have a movie coming out. Mm-hmm. How have you gone through this experience differently this time?
Well, so I've done it before, so I kind of know what to expect. And also this time around, I'm a producer. So the actual process of making the movie, I was much more directly involved with. So I feel in a way much more ownership over the end result, because The Martian, I was an excited observer. And I look at the movie The Martian and I say, they did a really good job with this. Mm-hmm. When I look at Project Hail Mary, I think we did a really good job on this.
Right. Now I have this copy of this book here. Ryan Gosling is on the cover for many people, even people that have read the book. He is this character now. As a producer, did you have feedback on, I think this guy could work?
Yeah, all right. I mean, well, yeah. So as a producer, I had to I had to be one of the people who approved Brian's casting, but that was obviously a no-brainer of a decision. It was just a matter of I had to like officially say yes. Ryan was interested right from the start. He is also a producer on the film now, but he was interested right away. I mean, he was already attached to the project before the book came out on shelves.
I have a question here from Tabitha, who's from Sandy, Utah. And okay. Tabitha wants to know, do you think the movie sort of visually portrays Rocky, who becomes a main character in this book, the way that you envisioned him in your mind? She also says, this is my favorite book ever. I'm reading it a 54th time. And I will say respectfully to you, Andy, I think Tabitha should start another book after she...
I think if you're at number 54, that's probably plenty. Maybe move on to another book. How about some Blake Crouch? That's what I always recommend when people ask me for recommendations.
Go read
Blake
Recursion.
Crouch. Recursion is my personal favorite of his. Although most people, I think, like Dark Matter more.
There you go.
Anyway.
Rocky.
Yes. So here's the thing. I am kind of on that aphantasia scale. So I don't have a very visual imagination. That's what aphantasia means.
Got it.
And different people, they have learned, some people, if you picture an apple, they see every little detail of an apple in their mind. Other people do not get an image at all. And they just have the idea of like, I know what an apple is. I understand the concept of an apple. I can identify an apple. And I can tell you all about apples, but if I close my eyes and try to picture an apple, some people, it literally, they would say like, that doesn't make sense. What do you mean picture in your mind? That doesn't make sense. So those people have...
I don't think I'd ever heard of that before.
Yeah, it's called aphantasia. Anyway, and it's not any sort of disability. It's just different brains work different ways, and different brains maintain, process, and present information different ways. So for instance, Rocky, I had... done all the science work to define his morphology, figure out how his biology worked and everything like that. But I didn't have an image in my head of what he looked like physically. I mean, he has a thorax and 5 legs, but I couldn't have told you if those legs are thin or fat, if they're smooth or bumpy or anything. So when I saw the puppet, the puppet that they were going to use for Rocky, they showed that to me and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So that's what Rocky looks like. I mean, they would often ask me questions. The art department would say, what does this look like? And I'm like, I don't know.
We had a lot of readers who wanted to know how you came up with Rocky in the first place. Not necessarily how he looked or anything, but just the fact that you invented a new species and had to come up with the idea of their language, how they communicate that language, how they eat, how they sleep, how they get rid of wastes, all the things that we learn about by reading the book.
Yeah, well, that was fun for me. I just had an open canvas to create an alien species. I like, it's speculative biology. There's whole Reddits dedicated to that. I mean, it's fun. And for me, and I had decided, it's not much of a spoiler. We learn toward the end of the book, the characters speculate, but as the author, I can tell you they're correct, that there was a panspermia event that emanated out from Tau Ceti that seeded life onto the various planets. It was like a primordial version of astrophage 4.5 billion years ago existed on the planet Adrian and seeded out into the nearby stars, and life was able to take root. That's not why it did it. It was just, mold, but that's how life ended up on some of the other planets. It also opens the door for me in the future to have more aliens in the nearby stars. So I started with that and then said but everything else is fair game. Their planet, I picked a real exoplanet. So their planet is really close to the star. So how do I explain why there's liquid water on this planet? Well, it'll be really hot, but you can have really, really hot water if the air pressure is really high. Okay, if the air pressure is really high, it means they have a really thick atmosphere. If they have a really thick atmosphere, it means light probably doesn't make it all the way down to the surface, which means there's no need to evolve vision, and so on. And so just bit by bit, I built up this species. The most important thing to me, though, was that it be truly alien. I didn't want it to be like a space opera alien, like Star Wars or Star Trek, where it's just like a guy in a suit, I didn't, and no disrespect to those shows. I love those shows, and my favorite show is Doctor Who. So, I mean, there's plenty of that. It's just that in my kind of like realistic attempt at sci-fi, I just don't believe that an alien species would be comfortable in our environment or vice versa. I just have a real tough time believing that. I mean, we have species here on Earth that have incompatible environments. If you swap the locations of a camel and a shark, they're both going to die, right? So why would somebody from another planet, entirely different evolutionary line, in an entirely different environment, why would they be comfortable? So I wanted it to be, that's why there has to be those like barriers between them. And that's like, I wanted it to be nothing like a human at all.
I have to ask, since you alluded to it, would you ever do a sequel in some way? Not to this story maybe, but in incorporating the world?
Absolutely. I have ideas for sequels for PHM, but I just don't have a good enough one yet. I have lots of ideas, but that's my next book. The one I'm working on now is not a sequel to anything that I've written. It's a new standalone science fiction story.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are you talking yet about what you're working on?
Nope. Just that I've told you. It's science fiction and it's standalone.
All right. Well, that was quite a tease.
That's not a huge surprise though.
Whoa, it's a sci-fi story.
Yeah. Oh my God.
We are approaching the end of our conversation here, and I'm going to turn to our weekly segment. So the New York Times Book Review, for more than a decade, has asked authors new and old a recurring set of questions about their reading. It's part of a series that we call By the Book. You were actually interviewed as part of the By the Book series in 2017. But now I have several new and extremely specific questions for you. Are you ready to answer some of these questions?
I will do my level best.
What is the last great book that you read?
I would say Paradox Inc. by Forrest Brazil. It's cool time travel science fiction novel. I don't know if it's out yet. I read a galley copy. So I don't know if it's out yet. I don't know if it's out when this will air. I don't know the release schedule on it, but I enjoyed it a lot and I recommend it.
Which 3 books would you bring to Mars with you?
Well, ignoring comedic answers like How to Survive on Mars and if it's like I'm going to be stuck, if those are the only 3 books I'm going to have access to for a long time, I'd probably pick books that are considered classics that I have never read, so that I could read them for the first time. But if we're going to limit it to books that I have read, then I would probably say I, Robot, for sure, by Asimov. Well, let's do one from each of my guys. I'll go for I, Robot from Asimov. For Heinlein, I will go The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. No. Tunnel in the Sky. Tunnel in the Sky. I like that one better. And then for Clark, Rendezvous with Rama. So Those would be my 3. I got to have one of each of my Holy Trinity authors there. So that's those are my answers.
Andy Weir, what is your favorite book that you think no one else has heard of?
So The Werewolf Principle by Clifford Simak. Have you heard of it?
Are you saying principal as in a tenant or principal as in I am the head of a school?
The former, the principal, whatever.
Tell me about The Werewolf Principle.
It is a story. It really appealed to me as a kid, I guess, because I was lonely. But it's a story of like this, like 3 different minds are in one body and the body can change shape between their original forms. So there's a human and then there's this like tetrahedron thing. And then there's like this werewolf looking, it's like a lupine looking thing. And those 3, like whichever body, they could just change shape into, any of those 3 bodies. Whichever body they're in, is that mind has control of everything, but the other 2 minds are there talking, right? They're like, hey, you should go here. So it's like a guy who can like go run along and do stuff and then change shape. And then a different brain is in charge, but then he's one of the guys advising him. I just thought that was a really cool concept. And he finds out the details of why and how he is. But so that one I really enjoyed as a kid because I thought, I was a pretty lonely kid. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat to be like, just to always have like people with you? Wouldn't it be nice to just never be alone? I think that's a little sad, but that's kind of one of the reasons I enjoyed that book so much when I was a kid.
I think it would be nice to never be alone.
Yeah.
In 2017, we asked you, what books are you embarrassed not to have read yet? And you said Dune by Frank Herbert, a book that in the past few years has been made into just 2 giant blockbuster films. Have you read it yet?
No.
Is this on purpose now, or are you just going to see how long you can go without reading it?
No. First off, still embarrassed, still haven't read it. In my defense, my wife and I had a baby, and so that really takes up a lot of my time.
Oh, yeah. Okay, fine. Likely excuse. Are you going to read it?
I plan to.
Okay.
But, it's another one of those things where I've seen so many adaptations of it. I love the story, but I also know every beat of the story.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let me ask this. If you are going to Mars and you could only bring 3 books with you, would one of them be Dune?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Right. I'll read Dune. Yeah. I don't have to take care. Do I have to take care of my kid on Mars?
Wow, you're really in dad mode. You're like super in it right now.
I'm all about. I'm dad. That's my number one job, right? I mean,
I'm going to ask you a final question, and this is a spoiler question, right? So a lot of people have read this book. I think a lot of people are going to see the movie. We're at the end of the interview, so listeners, if you just don't want to know what happens at the end and you haven't read the book yet, now's a good time to turn it off. Several readers had questions about this. They want to know about the end of the book. They want to know about the choice that you made at the end of Project Hail Mary. Ryland Grace has saved Earth, Arid, Rocky's home planet, from this astrophage parasite. And instead of returning home, which he can do, he decides to go back, save Rocky, who's in trouble, and then stay on the Iridium planet, possibly living out the rest of his days teaching science to young little rock children. Why did you end it this way? And were there alternatives? Was there a world in which Ryland did go home?
So that I knew that was going to be the end of the novel before I started writing the first page. So I knew that's how it was going to end. It was just, I didn't know all the steps that would get him there, but that's how it was going to end. And, no, I think it's a perfect ending for Ryland because he just really liked being a teacher. And in the end, he gets to be a teacher and hang out with his best friend. And, he doesn't know what waits for him on Earth. He doesn't know what state Earth is in. It was able to solve its problem, we learned, because the sun returned to luminance. And so they know that there's at least enough of an infrastructure on Earth to do space stuff. So he knows they're not all dead. But he'd also be returning to an Earth, even if he left right away, he'd be returning to an Earth where something like 75 years had passed since he left. Mm-hmm. Everyone he knows back on Earth will have died either in the ensuing, climate catastrophe or just of old age in the intervening time. He doesn't really have anything to go back to, but he's got his best friend here and a job that he loves. Why would he leave?
Andy Weir, thank you so much for coming on the book review to talk about Project Hail Mary.
Thanks for having me.
The book review is produced by Sarah Diamond and Amy Pearl. It's edited by Larissa Anderson and mixed by Pedro Rosado. Original music by Dan Powell and Alicia Baitu. Special thanks to Dahlia Haddad and Paula Schumann. We want to hear what you think about the show, so send us an email at thebookreview@nytimes.com. I'm Gilbert Cruz. Thanks for listening.